on the optimism theme, I end the book with a quote actually that I found in a research study, which was looking at countries around the world in terms of optimism. And the conclusion was the most optimistic people in the world, the researchers said, appear to be young, economically secure, educated women in Ireland. They've everything going for them. And I think we've never had more of them than ever before. So of course we face challenges as a country, but as we head into our second century, we have never been better placed to tackle them than any previous Irish generation. And we have the potential there, and the claim, at least in that study, to be amongst the most optimistic people in terms of our future prospects too.
You know, sometimes the facts speak for themselves, and maybe we should believe them. And maybe we should believe more good news stories, and learn more and look for more good news stories in our own lives and in the world, because they're true facts. They're as true as anything else that you're going to see. Céad Míle Fáilte, Gach Duine é Sin Inniu. Welcome, 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 1,000 million welcomes to an hour of Irish optimism. So pleased to be running this today. I'm so pleased that Mark's written his book, and it's wonderful to see you all here. So just wanted to introduce my two optimistic partners in crime. Victor Purton, who will be running an in-depth interview with Mark a little later, and Jenny Boymel. Jenny, wherever you are. Jenny will be running the breakout rooms and framing some of the discussion. So Jenny, Victor and I work at the Centre for Optimism, which is the think tank of optimism, and Project Optimism, which is the how of optimism. So thank you, Jenny and Victor, as always. And Mark Henry, who's written an amazing book on optimism in Ireland. We're going to introduce Mark a little bit later, but just a little bit of an overview, a very quick overview, because it's actually such a book for these times. There seems to be many reasons to be optimistic in Mark's book. Chief among them for Irish people is that we're now living on average 25 years longer than we did 100 years ago, which is great news for me anyway. I'm very pleased, actually. Other reasons to be optimistic, according to Mark, are that we are eating better, we are learning more and earning more, we're living better lives, and women and children are living better lives. And also we're happier. We're actually much happier than we've ever been. Alan Holmes, my good friend, has also given me another fun fact that I'll just throw in here as well, from the English, I think he's an English politician, or is an English researcher, called Simon and Holt. And he actually, in a TED talk, said that the Irish were rated as the most caring country who contributed the most to humanity in the world. Now, that was a few years ago, so I still hope that we're doing that. But we'll take the win for now on that. Now, in other intros, I would like to welcome and thank a few people. His Excellency, the Deputy Irish Ambassador to Australia, the new Deputy Irish Ambassador to Australia, Daniel Lowe, thank you so much for coming, and thank you also to your embassy for supporting our event tonight. Michelle Power, who is the head of the Global Alumni for UCD. Michelle, you've been a powerhouse of support for this event, and you're just an amazingly optimistic person. We've done lots of fantastic events with UCD, which is my old alma mater as well. And it's just been a wonderful experience. And thank you, Michelle, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Hi, everyone.
David Eccles for Enterprise Ireland, who's not here tonight. He has been incredible and actually facilitated the introductions to the Irish Embassy and to Daniel. So thank you, David, for that and for all your help. Teresa Keating from the Lansdowne Club and the Ireland Funds. Pamela Spreckley from the Ireland Funds in Singapore. Thank you again for spreading the word and for your help tonight. And Raymond Sexton of the Intangible think tank in Ireland and around the world that is changing the world conversations at a time. So thank you all for coming. Now, I just thought, as we always start these events, these optimism events, but particularly these Irish optimism events, we'd like to start off with a question. And it's a question that we live and die by in Project Optimism and the Centre for Optimism. And that is, what makes you optimistic? It's a question that actually ignites the optimism in people, and we love it. So we just thought we'd ask a couple of people tonight before we got going, what makes them optimistic. So, Daniel, may I start with you first of all and ask you what's making you optimistic today?
Ihoa, August Mordin Margaherin. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Goramila Mahagat. I have many reasons to be optimistic in my day-to-day life. Having just recently moved to Australia, I have a new role, a new team, and that presents me with so many exciting opportunities to try new things, meet new people, work on new projects. And being here in Australia gives me the chance to explore this enormous country with every kind of climatic region you can list except polar, and see the wider region, as well as travel restrictions become less of a barrier. Just this weekend, I was in Sydney for the first time, got to see my first koala on a brilliantly sunny day overlooking the harbour, and it was fantastic. And this was only possible because the vaccine rollout has been so recently successful here in Australia, which is a real reason to be optimistic. More than 95% of Canberrans where I am are double vaccinated, slightly beating the figures we have back home in Ireland at 90%. New South Wales on par, but across Australia we've passed 80%. And that means that international travel can start once again, and that's another cause for optimism, as families can be reunited, many of whom won't have seen each other for years because very few, got on a plane on the 20th of March. They might have picked one Christmas to be at home and missed their chance. Personally, Christmas will be an odd time for me without the dark and wintry coziness I'm accustomed to in my corner of the Atlantic, but I'm optimistic that my first stab at pavlova will impress my in-laws. And we also saw the first commercial flight today between Australia and Fiji. For those of you that don't know, my embassy also covers Fiji and other countries in Melanesia, and the Pacific has been really economically hit by the pandemic, relying on tourism for their economy as much as they do. So I'm really, really happy to see this strong step towards recovery. Now, it might seem a little gauche to be talking about long-haul air travel during an international climate summit, but there is still cause for optimism. Aer Lingus and its parent group, which includes British Airways and Iberia, has just signed a deal to purchase sustainable aviation fuel as its brand.
Is that your voice?
Is blended with fuel that's been synthesized from waste vegetable matter, which lowers the carbon emissions of flying. And given that there is no way for people to travel outside of Australia without flying, it's good to be working towards lowering the impact of air travel. Then, keeping with the Glasgow summit, there is more cause even to be optimistic with this morning's joint declaration from the US and China. And that's instilled a new optimism amongst the negotiators that we can reach a meaningful outcome for the conference. And more widely, that shows that no matter how poorly the relationships across the Pacific have been reported to be, it shows that these two nations have been able to work together for months on this powerful statement, whilst growling at each other on other issues. But we can't forget that, as Greta Thunberg said, it's not just words. I think her actual words were blah, blah, but practical impacts. And on a smaller scale, I saw this morning that a forest in County Galway, just walking distance actually from Galway city centre, has reached its 20th anniversary. The first tree was planted 20 years ago, inspired by the first Conference of Parties, the UN Climate Summit in '95. They worked on getting planning permission and planted their first tree in 2001. And now it's 170 acres of mature and semi-mature trees, which is just really, really fantastic.
Wow.
And it's a haven for biodiversity. And got one more thing, is that the Socceroos are hosting their first international game in over a year against Saudi Arabia in a World Cup qualifier. Only 6 months ago, Australia had to compete in the Eurovision Song Contest by video link. And so here we are on the cusp of summer, looking at what optimistically we can hope to be a return to a happy and sociable way of life.
Wow. Okay. I don't generally judge these responses, but that's just amazing. I mean, there's dozens of things to be optimistic about. And you reminded me of so many things over here and at home and around the world. So thank you, Daniel. That's amazing. That's super duper optimistic. Thank you. Thank you for that. Mark, might jump to you now for a bit of optimism. We are going to hear a lot more from you later, but would you like to tell us what's making you optimistic, particularly today, Mark?
Well, hey, it's in the title, the facts, the trend data, the long-term picture.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about my book later. Well, mine's called In Fact, but I have to say it was inspired by a book called Factfulness. So hey, a little bit of a common title there. But it was a fantastic book by Hans Rosling. If you've never read it, it came out in 2018. And it basically said, here's the big picture in global progress, and everything most of you think about the world is wrong. Because most people, when asked, say the world's getting worse, the data says otherwise. Such an inspirational book that Bill Gates gave a free copy to every graduate student in America in 2018. So I recommend that for the next airport read once you've finished this tome, obviously.
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely. It's sort of maybe the sequel, maybe, yeah. Thanks, Mark. Thank you for that. Michelle Power.
Hi. Oh my God, everybody's optimism is like weighted in these grandiose things.
Optimism
makes me, and it's amazing. But honestly, I feel like this pandemic has done a number on me. So, and it's kind of, everything feels like turned on its head essentially. But at this point, and I was thinking about this, I was really contemplating it last night, I think making plans makes me optimistic. So I had to reschedule my wedding twice. I ended up just having like people earlier this year in a COVID-y wedding, we'll call it. Had my honeymoon in the Aran Islands, which wasn't really planned. It was gorgeous. I think the Irish on the call will testify to that. But I think like just kind of tentatively making plans for the future and being like, I think the obliteration of my calendar, my schedule, I found quite tricky. So I do feel I'm optimistic by my nature. And Noreen, thank you for that lovely introduction earlier.
No, every word
I do see myself as an optimist. So and it's gotten me through some difficult times. This too shall pass. But yeah, I think ultimately, you know, plans and looking towards the future, are like that's really what like gets me going from an optimistic point of view.
Yeah, I know, just looking ahead and believing that things will be okay. Yeah. And it helps us to be more resilient, you know, because we know that.
Noreen, what do you always say? If it's not all right, it's not the end.
Oh, I will circle back to that in about 2 minutes, right? Yes, we'll get on.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, no, I do love that definition, and I actually have an Irish version of it tonight, actually, but I'll circle back to that in a second. Michelle, thank you as always. It's lovely to have you, and thank you for sharing what's making you optimistic. Thank you. Now, Mr. Raymond. Mr. Raymond,
I'm still here.
You're here. Great. Wonderful. Will you jump on very quickly and tell us before you drive off again on your travels and tell us what's making you optimistic today?
Well, in honor of being in the car park at the McDonald's in Diggers Rest, I'm going to say it's excellence in the ordinary streets makes me optimistic. It's just the people that work in McDonald's, the people picking up the bins, people that have just kept going all the time, very mundane tasks, and have kept us all going in spite of all the confusion. So that's my piece for today. Excellence in the ordinary streets makes me positive. That's it.
I love that. Yeah. Well, we're just on a bit of a journey, you know, and we've got to, I think one of the things, Raymond, that I actually discovered myself during COVID, and I think you kind of said it from a different angle, and that is that we can't wait for everything to be okay for us all to be happy. We got to be looking around at the ordinary and just see that, you know, that's working, then life is working, you know. Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and safe travels, safe travels. Now, lovely Michelle did remind me around the definition that we use for optimism here at the Centre for Optimism and Project Optimism, and it's steeped, I've got to say, in reality. It's very realistic optimism. I'm a learned optimist. I've had to learn to become more optimist. Victor and Jenny are natural optimists, but it doesn't matter. It's a bit of a choice. It's a bit of a choice either way. You know, that's what we see, and we believe in the fact that at its core, optimism believes that things will get better and that somehow things will work out in the end. And if they haven't, it's not the end. And I actually got my gorgeous friend Anya Gallagher and her dad, who are Irish speakers, and I hope they're here tonight, to translate that for me loosely. And it goes something like this in my schoolgirl Irish, please forgive me. Credum lucht an docus, go me an sail, era dol cusagera, monamin, nilangera, togafos. Translation of that in Irish to English is: the optimists believe that everything will be as they wish in the end. If not, the end has not yet arrived. So yeah, we really believe optimism is a superpower. And if you don't believe us, believe the Dalai Lama, because he says, choose optimism, it feels better. So on that note, now, by the way, before I go into the next part of what we're doing, I should say that in a lot of these hours of optimism, we do talk a bit about the science, because the science is what underpins a lot of the beliefs around practicing optimism and becoming more optimistic. And Victor is a wonderful, wonderful research and resource tool for that. So please do come along to some of our other sessions, because Victor talks about the science and the research. And really, if you don't believe in the feel good of optimism, the science will get you over the line. So yeah, so keep that in mind for some other sessions that we are running. Now, just from here, I think we're going to pass on to Victor, who's going to have a very in-depth chat with Mark about his book and have some Q&A on that. And then we're going to have the lovely Jenny, who's going to frame some breakout sessions, so we can all go into some groups and discuss a couple of things which she'll frame for us. But what I would say is to think about your own optimism and think about what makes you optimistic, because I think that could be a good discussion point within the breakout rooms as well. So before I hand over to Victor, I want to introduce Mark just very briefly, all right? Mark trained as a psychologist and led the research and strategy functions of Irish technology companies before turning to work in tourism. Having spent 2 decades telling people all over the world what a great country Ireland was, he is, after all, the Chief Marketing Officer for Tourism Ireland. He is now passionate, very passionate, about sharing the incredible progress Ireland has made. So Victor, over to you to talk to Mark about his incredible book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noreen, and it's wonderful to have you know, native Irish spoken in our events, and to share optimism in Irish. Mark, look, I love your book. I've read it cover to cover. It just sings from every page, and it sings authenticity. You know, how long did it take you to write it? All those facts and all those reasons for optimism about Ireland.
You know, when I first had this idea, which was 3 years ago, I met a friend and a fellow author. I said, I'm thinking about this book, like 10 trends that changed Ireland, you know, and it'll be good for the 100th anniversary. And he said, 100th anniversary, you should do 100 trends. I said, yeah, that's a good idea. A publisher will like that, 100 trends. Whoa, I should have stuck with 10. It's fine. It's fine, but you have to then gather the data. This is, you know, I want to prove each of these points and to end up with 100 significant and meaningful and unquestionable positive trends for Ireland. I had to look a lot more even than 100 to narrow it down to that. So it was, it kind of, in a way, you had to gather the data, then to understand the data. So I spoke to 50 different experts around Ireland about, well, experts in education, experts in economics, experts in culture, you know, each of the areas, to understand how we achieved that. What did we do? What was the magic formula? And then put it all together into something. So I have to say, thank God for lockdowns, actually, because the saving time on commuting and no kids' sports, that was a blessing in disguise, but don't tell them that.
And look, one of the things you want to inspire everyone in our audience, you know, an optimist guide to Australia, an optimist guide to Melbourne, an optimist guide to Singapore. You know, the great hope is that everyone's going to be inspired to do this, because I think the first time you and I spoke, we actually had the same favorite book for the 2020s, Rosling's Factfulness. And one of the things, you know, even the other night I was channel flicking and there was this movie about the streets of Boston, and it were these thick Irish accents and people belting each other. And, you know, Australia was settled, you know, by Irishmen sent here as political prisoners, and Irish escaping the potato famine. And so one of the things you say in your book is to what extent that impression remains. You know, whether it's the Germans thinking about Ireland or the Australians thinking about Ireland. So tell us a little bit about that, because you've given speeches at the United Nations in New York, you know, you've taken visiting delegations. How hard is it going to be to shift those impressions we've got of the movies of the 1850s and the 1900s?
You know, country images change glacially. Now that's true of everywhere. And, you know, there's a lot of countries in the world. How much do we know about those on the other side of the world, or even in another part of Europe? You know, we don't know a huge amount. In fact, I think you're kind of lucky to know anything at all. So the fact that we feature in movies, even if they're gangster movies, I'll take it. You know, I'll take it, because again, as Oscar Wilde said, better to be spoken about than not spoken about at all. So, you know, that's fine. We'll absolutely take that. But I think, you know, is that reflective of modern Ireland? It isn't. And, you know, I suppose that is the second audience for the book. I mean, in one sense, you say I've worked 20 years in tourism, telling the world what a great place is. And I said, right now, I want to prove it. And the first instance, I want to prove it to the Irish, because we've come to that. But of course, we tend to be negative about our own place, and we see the negative news cycle, and I'll come to that. But then, yeah, to help maybe convince a few other people beyond the country that actually maybe their image needs updating, they should come and see the reality for today. So it'll probably take a while before, you know, we're in the next sci-fi thriller, but you know, I'm optimistic we'll get there. We'll get there. We're certainly in a few crime thrillers I've noticed now, European ones in the current day. So they're getting up to date. They're getting up to date.
Yeah, it's funny because, of course, the Centre for Optimism comes out of an Australian negativity about its own qualities. So I really get what you're talking about. And what are the biggest facts you've got in there? You know, right from my 20s when I was studying economics, you know, we were looking at human development rather than GDP. And one of your early facts is that Ireland is now number 2 on the United Nations Development Index, you know, up 22 places in the last 30 years. So what's Ireland been doing right, you know, in these last 30 years?
Yeah, to me, that this encapsulates a lot. It speaks to a lot of progress. So yeah, the United Nations does this Human Development Index. They've been doing it since the 90s, tracking quality of life around the world and ranking countries on it. There's a huge basket of quantitative indicators, but they fall into 3 buckets, basically. So the first one is health and longevity. Are people living long and healthy lives in a country? Secondly, it's around education. Are people, you know, getting enough educational years to develop their human potential? And thirdly, then it's about economics, basically income. Have people got the means to live, you know, a healthy and fulfilled life? So on each of those for Ireland, huge progress. And health, longevity, Nori mentioned earlier, I think we've added 25 years to our lifespans over the past century. So compared to those who were alive when Ireland gained independence 100 years ago, hence the optimism at 100, the point is there's a whole generation longer that we're living. In fact, again, not just living longer, but healthier. According to EU polls, the Irish are the healthiest in Europe, at least. That is to say, 84% of us say so. And that's more than any other country claim that we are fairly or very happy with our health situation. That's quite significant. And indeed, when you look at our behaviors, we're eating twice as much fruit and veg as we did 60 years ago. We're drinking the lowest level of alcohol we have in 30 years. So a lot of very positives in that first bucket that gives Ireland a great score. Second one is education. And in fact, it's here that the UN says we made the greatest progress, at least since when they started the polls. So I say the polls started in 1990. Noreen, myself, Alan kind of graduated, I suppose, in those early 90s from University College Dublin, in fact. And at that point in time, it was just, I'm trying to remember now, was it 13 or 15% of the adult population had a third level qualification. It might have been 15 at that time. It's now 15. So we've literally gone in that period to now 30 years to having the majority of the population having a third level qualification. It's doubled in 20 years. And that puts us, again, amongst the most highly educated people in all of Europe. And the third one of income, well, of course, a lot of people know about Ireland's economic success story, but it does distinguish itself from some other places. In other words, we're earning 5 times more than our grandparents did in the 1940s, and in real terms, and real incomes continue to increase. Because again, we read sometimes in other countries, there are problems because real income growth has stalled. It hasn't, Darren. It's keeping growing. Our household wealth has never been higher at all. And in fact, again, different from other places, income inequality is dropping in Ireland. So again, we hear, oh, divided societies. Some places around the world, income inequality is growing. The rich are getting richer. It is decreasing in Ireland. And in 2019, the last figures before COVID, it was at its lowest level on record. That's not perfect. I'll come back to that. I'm not saying everything's perfect, but all of those things together meant that in the UN index, we jumped from 23rd when they first started it up to now 2nd, behind only Norway. You can have Norway on for the next call. The point is, no other developed nation has actually gained so much in that period since they've started doing it. So I think, hence, we have a great story to tell.
You disappoint me, because when I first visited the Celtic Club as a sort of 18-year-old, they told me Guinness was a health food. So I gather you're going to tell me consumption of Guinness has gone down. Yeah,
but Irish whiskey is up. We can talk about that story. Our exports of alcohol have reached new highs. Irish whiskey has doubled in the last, in fact, I think it's quadrupled, in the last decade. But anyway, we might come back to that one.
We'll try and work out why it's spelled differently. So look, Ireland, again, thinking about movies, I remember last year watching a very sad movie about the sort of 1920 and, the difficulties of colonial Ireland. And, sort of when I think about my own ancestry, Lithuanian and Latvian, 1918, they got independence and, bang, the economy grew and people became more creative. So in what other respects has Ireland performed remarkably well? You've talked about health, you've talked about technology, you've talked about education. What else is thriving?
Yeah, exactly. And we've touched there on about 3 or 4 chapters of the book, so I've got about another 16 we could touch on. But how's the time? But no, let's start with culture. Hey, it was mentioned earlier, right? I think Daniel mentioned Eurovisions. Yes, you've got a long way to go, Australia, because we have won more of them than anyone else. Fact. But the point is, I suppose that's indicative of the Irish excellence in terms of culture and arts. We also have more Oscar winners per capita than any other country in the world. Yes, of course, there's more Americans have one on their mantelpiece, but per capita, we even beat the Americans in terms of that. I think there's a general point there about, Irish culture. I mean, again, sports was mentioned earlier. Our Gaelic sports are the #1 favorite sport and most participated in sport in Ireland, which actually, if you think about it, is quite an achievement because, people might have gone 100 years ago, now we're free, we can, we'll adopt all those Americans, we'll do basketball or we'll do soccer or whatever, but actually a real success story has been embracing, I suppose, internally our own culture and sports. I think there's a good story there. I think there's a good story about how we've opened up to the world. I mean, obviously we have, but in a positive way. So, I mean, you go back to, you mentioned it, emigration. Emigration was forced emigration. The 1950s were not a good period. The half of all 20-year-olds left the country and went somewhere else. We've completely eliminated that, completely reversed that in the last 50 years. Now we are one of the greatest places for immigration. So now we have nearly 1 in 5 people living in Ireland today who wasn't born here. And that's one of the highest figures anywhere in Europe. And in fact, again, we used to rely on the remittances from Australia and from the States to support people and families and communities in Ireland. Now it's the other way around. So Ireland is the source of $1.7 billion of remittances out every year. People who are working here now sending those home to help their families. I think that's a great story. But indicative, you mentioned it earlier, somebody mentioned earlier, the Good Country Index. Yeah, was it Noreen was talking about the fact that yes, we were #1 in the world, and this index was first developed a few years ago, saying not what have you done for your country, but actually what have you done for other countries? What have you done for the world? So it was a good index. Now we have dropped a bit since. I interviewed the guy who developed the index in the book, and he's saying, well, we changed the metrics a bit actually, but he said, don't worry, Ireland's consistently in the top, and really, there's not much difference between countries at the very top. But I think we're, things very practically that we're doing. UN peacekeeping. Ireland has the longest unbroken track record, and again, per capita in Europe, the highest participation UN peacekeeping missions. We've been at it since the 50s, shortly after the UN was formed. Overseas development aid, the government has now announced it's going to crack €1 billion in donations to development assistance next year, and that will put us in the top 10 countries per capita in terms of donations. So I think there's a lot to be positive about, a lot of good progress that they don't necessarily appreciate, and maybe actually with the Australian connection, there's one thing that again is very positive, that the Irish are in fact the most generous people in Europe. Now I know we actually like to think that we are, but there is science behind this. A survey done globally, I looked at the time that people give volunteering, how frequently people are donating money, and how often they've helped a stranger in the past month. And they track it globally. And Ireland comes out number 1 in Europe, right? But it's number 5 in the world. Number 4, Australia, you'd be glad to know. Number 3, I'm sorry, New Zealand. So, but hey, 3 great countries there, right, in the top 5 in terms of generosity. So I think, as I say, I could keep talking. I probably got another 5 chapters there, but there's more, because there's plenty of good news, and that's the point. Just trying to give context, give the facts, and show actually haven't we done rather well in the past century.
I think one of the things we've always worked on is gratitude and giving. You just in giving. We do so many charity events. It feels good. And when I think again, Ireland's role in peacekeeping, we had an event 2 weeks ago, and in fact, I see Panisi from Kenya's online and adding some comments. So we hope he's going to have a book on an Optimist guide to Kenya. But when you look back at the history of UN peacekeeping and the difficult role of Irish soldiers, for instance, in the Congo, and how you've kept going, I think it's remarkable. But so one of the things that you look at in this progress, is it government, is it the institutions, or is it the spirit of the people? So again, I come from a refo background. My teachers in primary school were all Irish, and the generosity, etc. So is it the people? Is it smart policy? Is it smart business people? Is it smart companies like Microsoft and the like coming to Ireland? Why have you outperformed other countries over the last 30 years?
And before I lose my thought, we were talking about films and you're talking about Congo. You should check out Siege of Jadotville on Netflix. Anyone who's seen it. It's about the Irish Army in 1950s when they were trapped in the Congo. And it's an excellent story, actually, because talking to movies with Irish people, it's a positive one. Hey, it's on Netflix. Great. And some nice famous stars. But anyway, back to how we've achieved it. I suppose there's the point of why have we outperformed all these other nations? And I suppose that was a critical bit I wanted to draw at the end of it, was okay, so you've seen all this success, why? And I suppose identified 4 factors, 4 things, again, from all the people I've interviewed and from looking at the figures. One was our stability as a nation, because if you think about it, we have actually now been an independent democratic nation for 100 years. And actually, that's unusual because of the Second World War, right? There's only a dozen nations that have been continuously democratic for that 100 years. I think that's been positive in ensuring we have a good, stable, and functioning institutions of state. It's the first thing. Therefore, people can invest, entrepreneurs can start businesses because they're confident, the state is going to stand by them and do the right thing. So I think that was important. So I think, talking about people, I think the community, our strength of community, our depth of community has been very important too. We have very high levels of interpersonal trust. We are, generally speaking, a cohesive country, or small, but we're not a divided country. We don't have a strong sense of elite in anyone. So in fact, going back to that point, income inequality has decreased because we have generally viewed this country, made sure this country is a fair one. And as votes have risen, everyone's has risen, generally speaking. Of course, there are a few exceptions, but generally a strength of community there has been strong. I think, if they were the ground on which, the soil on which was the fertile territory on which we grew, stability, our community. To me, it was the water of education, if you like, that helped that growth, because, to superpower our human potential. by ensuring that half the adult population now has third level qualification, for example. And a lot of investment has gone in, huge amount in recent decades, in terms of addressing those with special educational needs as well. That has significantly grown, I think, our potential. And then, to me, what made all that, the sunshine that made all that come together, was our openness as a country. I suppose we've always had, because of immigration, that connectivity with the world. But when we joined the EU in the 1970s, the EEC as it was at the time, just all of a sudden, I suppose we looked beyond our biggest, nearest neighbor and kind of looked much broader in our horizons. And all of a sudden, we were really comparing ourselves to other places and competing positively and healthily with other places. I think that the two-way flow of the Irish going out to the world, and then the flow of learning and the competition from understanding best practice elsewhere, I think that was really the warmth, the sun that helped us grow our little plant in our part of the world. So I think overall, there's a lot in that actually we could dig into, but to me, those are the four factors that made sure Ireland outperformed other destinations. That's our magic formula.
It's the heart. It's the optimist heart, as you say. I think that's brilliant. Look, I'm going to ask one more question before I throw back to Jenny. So when I've had a few Guinnesses or Irish whiskey, I start to sing When Irish Eyes Are Smiling. Of course, a great Hollywood song as well. So has all this success, economically and health-wise and the like, made Ireland a happier people?
It's a good question. The truth is it has. Now, we could spend a long time talking about why people don't think it has, and I have a whole chapter in the book about why people find it hard to accept that we made such progress. But the EU loves to do polls. I love them. They compared the Irish, compared the whole of Europe about how happy people were about their own personal lives. The most recent poll, a couple of years old, 97% of Irish people said they were fairly or very happy with their lives. 97%. 2 weren't sure. 1% said they were unhappy. It was the happiest country in Europe. But I mean, now most people in most countries are actually happy with their lives. But the Irish are exceptionally so. When you look at life satisfaction, 90% say they are fairly very happy, satisfied with their lives. And on the optimism theme, I end the book with a quote actually that I found in a research study, which was looking at countries around the world in terms of optimism. And the conclusion was the most optimistic people in the world, the researchers said, appear to be young, economically secure, educated women in Ireland. They've everything going for them. And I think we've never had more of them than ever before. So of course we face challenges as a country, but as we head into our second century, we have never been better placed to tackle them than any previous Irish generation. And we have the potential there, and the claim, at least in that study, to be amongst the most optimistic people in terms of our future prospects too.
Well, you've heard me say, optimism is the fuel of innovation and strategy. And it sounds like if the young women of Ireland are the most optimistic in the world, you've got the fuel in the tank. Now, speaking of optimistic young women, fuel in the tank, thank you, Mark, for answering those questions. Can I throw to Jenny?
Thought maybe Noreen wanted to say something before I came on, Victor.
Oh, no. Well, I think you're probably going to say it anyway. I mean...
Okay, well, I'm happy to go then.
No, actually, all I was going to say is, Mark, really, I just think this really rang so true for us, because it's such an inspiring thing for us all to perhaps to consider doing about our own town, our own village, our own world, there's always lots of realistic, tough things happening and whatever, lots of bad stuff we seem to see all the time. There's so many good things that are happening as well. So I think it might be a little bit of an exercise to think about, our own world and what's actually working in it. Maybe do a little bit of a study on that and look at all the good things that are working, not all the bad. So that was all I was going to say.
Thank you. I think adding on to that, I think it's, you can do the optimism of your country, you can do the optimism of your town, the optimism of your company. There are so many wonderful ways you can spin this. And Mark, I think you've set a wonderful foundation for so many people to use that approach and really go for it. So thank you. So now we'd love to give you an opportunity to talk to each other. Mark has said so many things and created so many insights and ideas in my mind, I know. What we'd love you to do, we're going to put you into some breakout rooms, and what we'd love you to do is to discuss what makes you optimistic and think about some of the key insights that came from what Mark shared. So we'll open those rooms. So it's give everyone a chance to speak. We'll give you about 8 minutes in there, and then we'll bring everyone back for discussion together. Welcome back, everyone. Wow. One of my favorite parts of these events is always seeing everyone's faces when they come back, because you always see these huge smiles and minor confusion because people were interrupted mid-sentence. Apologies for that. Apologies. So I've got Mark with me here, and what we'd love is a couple of highlights. We might ask you all to mute yourselves if that's possible. So some questions, some highlights from the rooms, because I know that there were some pretty interesting conversations going on out there. So who would like to start us off? I can, of course, call on some people, which I will do. You know I will. But is there anyone who... Oh, there's someone put their hand up. Sid, come join me.
Yeah. How are you?
Excellent. Welcome, welcome.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me for this session. My question to Mark Henry is, I mean, he has given a very bright picture optimism about Irish optimism. What is the judiciary system in Ireland? I mean, what is the rate crimes in Ireland? How is it going? I mean, the systems are very intact, very strong there. So what is the crime rate in Ireland?
It's a great question. And I actually have 2 sections in the book, and there's 2 facts around it in the book. I mean, one is that, yes, there's strong evidence that crime is decreasing, but we do have a statistical problem with that. I write about it in the book, as in the crime statistics have been deemed to be not reliable by the Central Statistics Office here. So there's a bit of work to be done on that. But where we do have data, for example, for youth crime, there's been very significant decline. Like in the last 20 years, the number of crimes involving youths coming before the courts has halved. The number of youths that are being referred through the Garda referral program, as in the police referral program for troubled youths, has halved. And, you know, why is that? Well, actually, because economic prospects are improving. Why? Because retention of children at second level education has improved hugely. So more of them, the schools, more teachers, there's more teacher-pupil ratios, if you like, are declining. So there's more attention being given to kids. They're staying longer in school, and there are more job opportunities for them. That seems to be keeping them out of trouble. So from where we can tell, from the statistics that are available, things are on the way again towards the better. Again, despite what one might read in the newspapers.
Thank you. And Sid, we're looking forward to Pakistani optimism soon. We'll hold you to it.
Okay, right.
Kay, do you want to share with us?
Yes, I do.
Sure.
I do. I'd love to share and ask a question, Mark. So in our session, John was cut off midway through sharing his big list of things that were making him feel optimistic. And I think we got through 3 before he got cut mid-surface as we were pulled back to the room. And they were all gratitude-based, Mark. And so in your research, and can I just say, I'm so in love with this session, and it's making me happy and sad because all my family are in Ireland. So I love your voices, and it's so nice to see you all. But apart from that, what does your research and what's your book tell us about the Irish approach to gratitude?
Well, that's a good question, because one thing we haven't touched on is why people do find this stuff hard to accept. Because certainly, you know, 97% of people say that they personally are fairly or very happy. But if you ask them what they think other people are, generally speaking, they don't think other people are happy. And they don't think that because, of course, the news cycle, and as I argue, as I demonstrate really, our psychology predisposes us actually to see the negative. You have to work hard see the positive. I mean, there is literally an inbuilt negativity bias in human beings that drives the news cycle, because there's nothing wrong with it. They are serving what people pay attention to, and I think that makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. It was the ancestor who spotted the predator, in the grass. It was the one who ran fastest and who survived. Those who didn't see it coming, didn't live to tell the tale. So, that is good reason why that's there, but we have to combat it. And I do think, for me, not enough people appreciate that, which is in a way why I've written the book. It is to give that context. It is to say, to wait a minute, step back from the news cycle, look at the bigger picture, look at the long term. Again, human beings until the modern era only live to be 35 years of age. You have to think long term. Do you know what I mean? You reproduced, then you were gone. So, now the world is so much different, and we do need to, and changing so much faster, of course, that the book is designed to give people that context, and hopefully from that, gratitude will flow. But I haven't actually seen any surveys of gratitude in Ireland that I included in the book.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you. Brendan, do you want to ask a question?
Firstly, look, well done, Mark. And I came across Hans Rosling many years ago, and it was a fantastic eye-opener. So it's wonderful to see you've done the equivalent. My question, no matter what way I phrase it, is not going to come across in an optimistic fashion. So I'm going to smile as I put this out. There are two ways to actually appear good versus your peer group. One is if you actually do very positive things and outperform them. The other is if they actually don't do that well and maybe sit back and slide a little bit into reverse, etc. Is there any way that you can measure that impact? And I am not talking about or anything of that nature. When you look around the world at the 200 odd countries that are there, how many are really pushing forward on a consistent basis? How many are standing still? How many are going backwards? Are we good or just lucky?
Oh, an excellent question. Excellent question. I mean, I suppose if I go back to that United Nations index, because that's comprehensive, that's quality of life, that's across the world. In over the 30 years they've been tracking this, there have been consistent and very significant increases around the world. Yeah, for some more than others, of course. In that, if you think of those 3 decades, a lot of development in Asia in terms of quality of life, a lot of development in Africa in terms of quality of life, because things like longevity, education increasing significantly. So if you will, a lot of perhaps those who were lower down the rankings to begin with have closed the gap with those further up the top. Those further up the top, of course, well, they've less places to go, if you like, but the increases have been slower. And to your point, some leading countries, of course, in the last couple of years have seen reversals in longevity, have started to go into reverse in terms of length of life. Certainly some countries have stalled in terms of their education increases. Some developed nations, they haven't seen the growth that Ireland has. But I think that it puts the finger on the challenge, right, for Ireland, because it's great to be second, but you're never going to be first, really. I mean, the challenge now is to sustain that. And that is about sustaining that investment in education, or else others will simply catch up and will be bypassed. We need to sustain that focus on stability and democracy, and all those good things, and preserve community, because a lot of the challenges that we face now threaten some of that. We have a big housing challenge in Ireland, because a big, huge shortage of houses haven't been built for the last 10 years and to meet demand, and that is a challenge.
I think we're going to have to discuss this in our next session next week. Brendan might have to come back and hear the rest of the response. Thanks, Brendan. Noreen, back over to you to wrap up.
Oh, thank you. Gosh, no, I want to keep talking, actually. Jenny has referenced another session that we're having with the European and North American audiences on the 15th of November. It'll be 15th November for you. It'll be 7 a.m. 16th of November for us in sunny Melbourne. But looking forward to it and hearing more. I think we're just scratching the surface. What I would say, just kind of conclusion from my side is, look, I think, sometimes the facts speak for themselves, and maybe we should believe them. And maybe we should believe more good news stories, and learn more and look for more good news stories in our own lives and in the world, because they're true facts. They're as true as anything else that you're going to see. With Project Optimism, we also practice optimism. So if you also want to get another dose of practicing optimism, becoming more optimistic, we have a course called The Habits of an Optimist, and it's It's a very simple course. It's a free resource. Come and have a play with it and learn to be a little bit more optimistic and lighter and brighter in your life. But Mark, thank you. This was really quite, I don't know, it was quite amazing. I mean, I had basically I skimmed some of it, sorry, through the book, but I really have the essence of this now. I really feel that I know where this is going to go and how it's going to affect so many people well beyond the Irish diaspora. So thank you. Do you have some words of conclusion? I know that you're going to tell us where we can find your book. I think you're going to put that into the chat. Please let us know everything. Actually, you've just done it. Fantastic.
There you go.
Any final words?
To be respectful of time, I'll leave it there, but there's a lot more in the book, a lot more we could talk about, and we'll touch on some of it next week for those who want to come back for more.
Yeah, that's right. Please, everyone, tell all your friends in Europe and North America to come along. We'll put the links in here to book. But thank you all, and Daniel, thank you so much for coming along, and all our other special guests, and for everyone that's made some time to have an hour of optimism with us tonight, an Irish hour of optimism as well.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that hour of optimism, and if you'd like, you can watch other hours of optimism from Africa and elsewhere on our website at centreforoptimism.com, and we'd love you to get involved in our work as infectious optimists and spread your own infectious optimism and share your insights at centreforoptimism.com. Have a wonderful day.